Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to the month in review for December 2024. There's plenty to look at in terms of models and STL files, though we're a bit light on news, though the few bits of news that we do have are pretty big. So let's jump into it, as always, starting with our honorable mentions. Starting off in the solo category, Alessandro Giuliani gives us a solid job on this Quest model. First up, he's done a really good job on the skin. I can see at least 3 different colors being used, and they're blended together really, really nicely. Next, kudos on the face. Faces are very difficult to do because of such tiny detail, but again, he does a great job of getting all the details like highlights on the cheekbones, highlighting the hair for the eyebrows, and he even does the eyes so that it looks like he's checking in his peripheral vision, almost like he's about to fight a guy in front of him, but he's looking just to make sure he's not going to get surrounded. I find eyes one of the most difficult things to do without ruining the whole face really, really quick. So nice job for that one. And lastly, good job for painting a design on the base. Instead of using a pre-printed, a textured base, or some kind of textured paint, he actually painted on those stones to make it look like the model is standing on cobblestone. And by going with that contrasting green, it makes the whole model and the white and the red stand out that much more. But if you'll notice, it also matches the bedroll behind his back, so it still brings some uniformity to the model as a whole. So nice job there. Up next is Explorer, who right off the bat chose to paint with white, which automatically ups the difficulty level a notch. Then, the use of what looks like a brown wash to help create the shadows in that white armor, but without making it look really, really dirty. You can also see a nice job with the highlighting and the tiny details on things like the boots to make them stand out even though they're predominantly black. And then by painting all of those lights on the shoulder, the arm, the chest, gives the model some color and some character. Our final honorable mention in the solo category is Sem Titulo 5, who has painted up this wood elf here. The scheme has lots of really earthy colors, which of course you'd expect from a wood elf, but it also has some bold color as well, which you'd also expect from an elf. So the scheme, it's simple, but it's very catching. What impressed me the most, though, is the background and the presentation. By putting this model on a fallen log or a rock outcropping, coupled with the model's pose, it really sells the idea that this model is a lone scout or a ranger, and the backdrop really completes the illusion that the model's deep in the forest. So nice job on that one. Heading on over to the unit category. First up, we've got Chazzle Dazzle, who painted up a simple but solid paint scheme for this unit of Wood Elves. It's an excellent mix of using earth tones and uniformity. Plus, the paint job itself is simple and clean. Normally, I would say there should be some kind of accent color like that previous model that we looked at. But here, the way in which the shield, pauldrons, and the helmets are done, Chazzle has managed to make the highlight color another earth tone. So it's noticeable, but it still blends in with the rest of the scheme, and I think it looks fantastic. Moving on, we have Conan Barbaric, who gets on this list for painting up his grunt robot to look like Iron Man. I always love it when painters pull off stuff like that. My only critique here would be to have painted the rest of the squad something unique as well. For example, maybe use those variations of Iron Man from the third film where they're all fighting against Mandarin, and then you would have uniformity and you'd still have variety all at the same time. But still, kudos for looking at the model saying, I could do that like Iron Man, and making it clear that he did. Our next honorable mention goes to David D., who seems to be appearing a lot in these honorable mentions. Nice job to David. But here, his desert scheme for these HDF troops is brilliantly executed. By using the helmet visor to bring in that bit of contrast, it provides a break from all the neutral, really earth tones and colors. But it does so in a way that fits the models perfectly. It's not bringing in the color simply to have an accent color. It makes sense that their visors would reflect the light like that. Also, kudos for painting the dogs, and if I'm not mistaken, the dogs are doing a bit of a yin-yang here, with each one having the colors of their fur and their mane flipped between the two. It makes them both mirror images and complete opposites at the same time, which I think adds a really nice touch. Next up, we have Stephen Bickle, who's gone with a much bolder color scheme for his unit of grunts, but has still managed to use the dusty dry brushing on the legs to dirty them up a bit and give the illusion that these models have been in the field for quite some time. I think the purple and the gray go really well together, and he's used them here to make the armor plating really stand out. Everything is well highlighted, and as with many of the other entries, special care is given to those visors to give them a glassy, reflective look. And the last honorable mention to the unit category goes to Z Runelord, who went in the opposite direction with a unit of grunts giving them a very worn and weathered look while still adding nice details like the orange visors, the green wrist screens, and the aqua shoulder patches to add some color to the overall kind of grungy look that they have. The models also has some really nice detailing, for example with the serial numbers on the chest and the helmet. Now whether those were transfers or free-handed, either way, they add a really nice touch. Moving over to the legendary category, we have some great ideas for these battle otters. And first up, we have Kodorgo. His scheme was one of the darker entries in terms of overall use of color, making it lean more towards what you'd expect from a rat-themed army rather than an otter, which are typically portrayed as really bright and friendly and shiny. But his model here comes across as kind of grungy, shadowy, dark. The yellow and the red give the model some great color variety, but they're still used in a way that keeps the overall tone of the model darker. It's not like you have a dark model with these super bright highlights that really kind of throw you off a little bit. Everything is subdued, but it's still very crisp and very clean. With our second honorable mention here, it's the exact opposite. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that name, so I'm just going to call you Z. Z has gone with an incredibly bright scheme with lots of bold and contrasting colors. And it does look like Z used an airbrush to do the fur on the otter. And I mean, just look at that otter's face. The amazing way the colors blend and transition. The shadows are present, but they're subtle. And I really like those little extra touches and details, like how the eyes and the nose are painted with a glossy finish to give them that wet look. So as always, nice job to everyone who participates in these monthly painting competitions. Great work, inspires the rest of us with great ideas and motivates us to paint our own stuff. So thanks for doing that. So now we move on to news and events. Early this month, OnePageRules released the Duchies of Vinci faction book. This marks the first of OPR's faction-focused lore books, and depending on how well it does, I imagine this will determine how many more of these faction books we'll see. And I'm also curious what the plan is to have the faction books be more in the fantasy world, or will they cross the line and also start appearing in the grim dark future? Who knows? That's something that 2025 will have to show us. The next bit of big news, and this is pretty big news, OnePageRules creates the Rangers program. The Rangers program is meant to help grow the OPR community by essentially deputizing volunteers to be points of contact and organizers for events in their area. If any of you play the game Malifaux, it's very similar to the Henchman program that Weird Games does for Malifaux. Players who are interested in becoming Rangers need to submit a short application and, if selected or approved, I guess would be the better term, will be listed on the OPR website as a point of contact for people in the area, and will also be expected to hold at least one monthly public event to help the community grow. Now, these events can include demo games, tournaments, painting days, casual game nights every week, leagues, campaigns, pretty much anything that's available to the public and will get people involved or introduced into OnePageRules as a game. And just like with the contact info, these public events will actually be listed on the OPR website. So if you sign up for this, you might start to get strangers and newbies who found it on the website walking in. So another thing about the Rangers, you got to be pretty good with people and you got to be able to teach stuff. So if that interests you, head on over to the website and you can sign up from there. Now, our last bit of news is that the biannual community survey is now available. Here is your chance to voice your opinion on the game, on the hobby, and the more people that complete this survey, the better of a snapshot OnePageRules gets of what the community looks like and what the players want. So make sure you go over there and submit it. The survey takes maybe 5 minutes unless you got an awful lot to say on that very last question, because the last question's open-ended and it's literally what suggestions do you have and what feedback do you want to give. Personally, I said I hope now that they're bringing back some of their older games, they bring back Death Ball. We'll see. But head on over there and make sure you complete the survey too. So, now that we've covered honorable mentions and big news items, it's time to look over the STL releases, starting with the models for Quest and StarQuest. This first model was technically part of the November release, but for some reason it wasn't available to me when I did the November video, so I'm going to add it in here. So this is a Berserker from the Eternal Dynasty, and it's definitely a bit of a change from what you'd expect from an army with a samurai aesthetic. The model, though, still looks pretty darn good, and if you want to be a bit cheeky, I suppose you could run this as a human or a Havoc Berserker and just paint the head to look like the model's wearing a skull of a Dynasty Warrior rather than be a Dynasty Warrior. I'm just saying. Either way, looks good, nice big hammer, very Berserker-y. I think it's nice. The next model here for Quest is a Plague Demon Druid, and it's got a lot of details, so there's plenty of work to be done here for those of you who are interested in it. Now, I have to be honest, at first glance, I actually thought this was a Beastman model. Or, I also thought after staring at it for a little bit, if you paint all the natural body armor on him to look like wood, it could pass as an Ent or a tree figure or something like that from the Wood Elves as well. It doesn't automatically come across and scream demonic. I do really like the frog. I know in the past I've kind of been hard on the little animal companions, but I like the frog. It's nice and big, and it doesn't seem like it's an accessory. It seems like part of the model itself. And bonus points to anyone who kit bashes it to have like an arm or a leg hanging out its mouth like that. So I'd be curious to see that for any of you who do it. Our last Quest model is for StarQuest, and it is a Jackal Infiltrator. And it's simple and it's straightforward. It's what it says on the tin. The pose and the weapons are exactly what you would want for a roguelike character. The Jackals seem like a faction that would kind of lend themselves to this kind of a class anyways. And the only reason there isn't a cloak on it is because it's sci-fi. Although I suppose you could always green stuff one on there if you wanted it. But it's nothing super spectacular, but it's nice and solid. Moving on to the files for the Human Defense Force. The commander models for the HDF look pretty solid. Like the drill sergeants from the November release, these models look suitably commanding, they have a heroic rock to stand on, and they're pointing. I mean, what more do you want from a human commander? Next up for the HDF are the veterans, and like the sappers from the November release, there's a lot going on here. You've got plenty of options. By mixing up male and female heads, helmeted and exposed heads, you could print 3 or 4 squads without very many repeats, and that's without changing out the weapons. This image here shows just 6 of the weapon variations that you could use, and like with the sappers, I think all of them look really, really good. I can't identify what each one is by sight yet, but I think each one, a squad of them, would look really, really fantastic. I also really like the sculpts for the officer and the command squad models. There's a lot of attitude and character on all of them, especially that gigantic cigar that guy has. Moving on to the ogres. Overall, I like them. I'm still not totally sold on the dog legs. I know a lot of you said you liked them, and you gave reasonable ideas for why they would be there. That's all well and good. It's just personal preference. It's not my cup of tea. The other thing that I would want to point out is the arm design. It's giving me Eternal Dynasty vibes. Those shoulder pads are looking very samurai-ish to me. But the torso, the helmet, the weaponry, all of that definitely makes these guys look nice and beefy and really, really intimidating. Now, as for the attack vehicle, I think it looks too much like Tank Jr. I would have wanted attack vehicles to have a different and distinct hull design. Kind of like the difference between an M1 Abrams battle tank and a Bradley fighting vehicle, rather than have a tank and tank light. I will say, however, that I really like the look of the support vehicles. Even though they use the same hull as the attack vehicle, which is basically a smaller version of the tank, I do like the way that they've designed the various guns. Whether it's the big barrels, the mortar, the rockets, the missile, whatever, those are designed really, really well so that your attention is drawn to the weaponry and you don't actually really even notice the hull. So that's it for the HDF STL files. Now let's move on to the Wood Elves. In November, we got the elf part. Now we're getting the wood part. That is, the releases are for the creatures that fight alongside the elves, like tree men, forest rays, things like that. I think it's an overall interesting aesthetic because of how it combines plants and animals. The models have the bodies of trees, the hooves of beasts, the talons of birds, but what confuses me a little bit is the heads. Now, they look menacing, don't get me wrong there. The look is really, really good, but it looks like the trees are wearing the skulls and antlers of deer, which implies that they killed the deer to turn them into armor. Seems a bit contrary for an army that's based on balance with nature. I mean, I suppose you could just paint them as wood and say that the tree spirits adopt that look to look menacing, and that's totally fine. But at first glance, it looks like animals were indeed harmed in the making of this film. I think the Tree Man has a much better idea, a much better overall look of making the face look like tree bark and the antlers look like horns that are made out of branches. Similar comments on the brutes. Overall, they look great. I really like that the one arm can be that massive boulder or rock or maybe a crystal if you wanted to add some mystical element to it. But still, those heads. However, overall, these look like good models that have a lot of possibility for paint schemes that can balance bright colors and really dark, earthy colors. There's chances to show really strong color accents to explore how you could show magic and mystical power coursing through and animating these creatures mixed in with the bark and the stone and trees and branches and vines and things like that. I think one of the most exciting things or one of the most interesting possibilities would be to paint that Tree Man Wraith, where you could paint the runes and the eyes and maybe little bits around the armor with like a glowing blue, almost to seem like a wisp or a spirit is like trying to burst out of it as it's animating the creature. And at the same time, you could have the bright green leaves for the foliage and then paint the bark with a very, very dark brown, and you'd have this super eye-catching model with lots of color and lots of contrast. And last up, we have the Dwarf Titan. And this thing looks like it would be incredibly intimidating to print, paint, and then fight against if you're on the other side. I like that it's run by a crew rather than a single pilot. That's kind of a cool aesthetic. It gives me like 40K Titan vibes, where you lift off the head of, or the cap of the Warhound, and you can see all the different beings inside that are helping to run the machine. It's not just one guy piloting the whole thing. And I also like the base, because it gives you lots of ways to make the Titan look dirty, look metallic, oily, industrial, very, very dark, but then have a major contrast with the crystals around it being very bright and contrasting. So I'm super curious to see what the community can do with the paint schemes in the monthly painting competition. So folks, that's it for the month of December, and that's it for the year 2024. OnePageRules is moving onward and upward, and I look forward to what 2025 will bring. So let me know what you thought of the painting, of the news, of the models. Tell me down below, and I'll see you next time. Keep your dice on the table.